The night my daughter asked me to empty my wife's closet, the house felt colder than it had the day we buried her. Not quiet cold, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would break next. If stories about hidden pain, betrayal, and quiet justice deserve to be heard, please subscribe to Silent Revenge Story, share this video, and press the bell icon so you never miss a story that speaks when others stay silent. My name is Richard, and for 32 years my wife Alina was the soft order behind my noisy life. She folded my chaos into neat corners, remembered birthdays I forgot, and somehow made grief seem like something that could be survived, until cancer took her in pieces. First her hair, then her strength, then her voice. When she died, the house didn't just lose a person, it lost its rhythm. 3 days after the funeral, my daughter Claire stood in the doorway of our bedroom with her arms crossed, eyes sharp, grief already replaced by impatience. "Dad, we need to clear Mom's things. Fast," she said. "Not when you're ready, not if you need help, just fast." "It's not healthy to keep all this," she added, gesturing to Alina's dresses like they were clutter, not memories. I nodded because that's what broken men do when they're too tired to argue. I told myself Claire was grieving in her own way. I told myself she was trying to help, but something in her tone felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced this conversation in the mirror. We started with the closet. Alina's scarves still carried her perfume, lavender and something warm I could never name. Every hanger I lifted felt like lifting a small piece of her absence. Claire moved quickly, efficiently, placing clothes into boxes labeled donate and trash. She didn't pause once. Then she said, "I'll take her suitcase. I'll deal with that." It was a simple sentence, too simple, my stomach tightened. "That old thing?" I asked. "Why?" Claire didn't meet my eyes. "Because it's easier, less for you to handle." Alina's suitcase hadn't been used in years. It sat on the top shelf, dusty, zipper slightly broken. My wife kept old things, letters, photos, life before motherhood. She once told me, "Some things you don't throw away because they remind you who you were before the world started taking pieces." I reached for the suitcase. Claire's hand snapped out. I said, "I'll handle it." That was the first crack. I didn't argue. I let her take it. Pain makes you passive. It teaches you to surrender ground you shouldn't. I watched her carry the suitcase down the hall like it weighed nothing, while my chest felt like it was collapsing inward. That night I couldn't sleep. The house creaked. The clock mocked me with every second. I kept seeing Alina's face the week before she died, the way she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll look carefully at the people you trust." At 2:17 a.m. I got up. Claire's car was in the driveway. The suitcase wasn't in the trunk. It was in the guest room, half hidden behind the bed, like she hadn't expected me to go looking. I told myself I was just checking. I told myself I was respecting my wife's memory. When I opened the suitcase, I expected old sweaters, photos, letters. Instead, I found documents. Bank statements, legal papers, copies of my signature poorly forged, a small velvet pouch with a necklace I'd reported stolen months ago, and at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, Alina's handwritten notes, not sentimental ones, records, dates, amounts, names. Claire's name appeared again and again. My hands shook so badly I had to sit on the floor. The pain I'd been carrying, raw, shapeless grief, suddenly sharpened into something else. Betrayal has a weight grief doesn't. It presses down harder because it comes from someone you built your life around. Footsteps creaked behind me. "Dad," Claire's voice was tight, controlled. "What are you doing?" I looked up at my daughter, the child I'd carried on my shoulders, the woman standing between me and the truth, and realized the pain wasn't just losing my wife. It was discovering that, while I was burying Alina, someone else had already been digging through her life. I didn't answer Claire right away. I just sat there on the floor, Alina's suitcase open like a wound between us. The documents lay scattered, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed. My silence seemed to bother her more than anger would have. "Dad," she said again, sharper this time, "you shouldn't be going through that." "Your mother kept records," I replied quietly. My voice didn't sound like mine, it sounded older. "She always did." Claire forced a laugh, light and false. "You're exhausted, you don't even know what you're looking at." But I did. I knew enough to feel my chest burn. I closed the suitcase slowly and stood up. "We'll talk about this later." Her shoulders relaxed immediately, relief flashing across her face before she could hide it. That told me everything. If she had nothing to fear, she wouldn't have looked relieved. The next morning, she changed tactics. Claire had always been good with people, better than a leaner, better than me. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from relatives, neighbors, even old friends from church. "We're worried about you. Claire says you're not coping well. Maybe you should see someone." By evening, the story had grown teeth. At dinner, Claire sat across from me, phone in hand, sighing loudly as if carrying a terrible burden. "I'm just trying to help Dad through his grief," she said, making sure my sister could hear her on speaker. "He's confused. He thinks Mom hid things from him. It's not healthy." I felt like I was shrinking in my own chair. My sister cleared her throat. "Richard, maybe Claire's right. Losing a leaner, it can unbalance a man." Unbalance, like I was furniture knocked out of place. Claire reached across the table and patted my hand. Not gently, possessively. "See, everyone's worried." The humiliation crept in quietly, not shouted, not dramatic. It came wrapped in concern and soft voices. It came with looks exchanged over my head, decisions made without me. By the end of the week, Claire had taken over everything. My appointments, my finances, even the mail. At the bank, she spoke for me. At the lawyer's office, she answered questions that weren't hers to answer. "She's under a lot of stress," people said about her. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one noticed the dark circles under my eyes or the way my hands clenched whenever Claire smiled too widely. The worst moment came on Sunday. We sat in the front pew, the place a leaner always insisted on. After the service, the pastor approached us, hands folded, expression grave. "Richard," he said softly, "Claire has shared some concerns." Claire lowered her head, the picture of reluctant honesty. "She thinks it might be best if she temporarily manages your affairs," he continued, "just until you're steadier." I felt every eye in the church on me. Pity is louder than judgment. It hums in the air, presses into your skin. "I'm fine," I said. Claire sniffed. "Dad, please, this isn't the place." That sentence, "this isn't the place," did something to me. It stripped me of dignity in front of people who had watched my wife die, who had eaten casseroles at my table and cried into my shoulder. I nodded again. By Monday, she had convinced my sister that I was a danger to myself financially. By Tuesday, Claire had access to accounts I didn't remember authorizing. By Wednesday, she was kindly reminding me not to drive too far alone. Each small humiliation stacked on the next, like stones placed carefully on my chest. I could still breathe, but barely. At night, alone in our bedroom, I would open a leaner's old journal, the one Claire hadn't found yet. I reread passages I'd once skimmed over. Notes about money going missing, about Claire's sudden debts, about a fear a leaner never shared with me directly because she didn't want to break the family. "If something happens to me," a leaner had written, "Richard must not let them make him feel small. That's how they win." I started to understand something terrible and clarifying. Claire wasn't just trying to erase a leaner's things. She was trying to erase me, slowly, publicly, kindly. And everyone was helping her do it. I let them. Because sometimes the deepest revenge doesn't begin with fighting back. It begins with letting your enemy believe they've already won. Silence became my armor. I stopped correcting people. When neighbors asked how I was really doing, I smiled and said, "Claire's taking good care of me." When my sister suggested I sell the house and move closer to family, I nodded as if the idea hadn't hollowed me out. I learned to speak less, to listen more. Silence made people careless. It made them honest. Claire mistook my quiet for defeat. She grew bolder. She spoke over me now, not just for me. At dinners, she'd finish my sentences incorrectly and laugh when I didn't correct her. She rearranged the house without asking, Alina's armchair gone, her books boxed up, her photos reduced to a single frame on a hallway table like a compromise. "I'm simplifying things for you," she said. "Too many memories aren't good at your age." My age, I was 62, not senile. But I said nothing. I watched instead. I watched her on the phone late at night, voice low, back turned. I watched the way she checked the mailbox before I could. I noticed how she flinched whenever legal mail arrived, then relaxed when it didn't. I noticed she avoided mentioning the suitcase at all, as if ignoring it could erase its contents from existence. One afternoon, while she was out, I opened Alina's journal again. This time, I read it not as a grieving husband, but as a man assembling a map. Alina had been precise, dates matched withdrawals, notes aligned with Claire's sudden emergencies over the years, a failed business idea, a mysterious loan, a boyfriend who vanished along with a large sum of money. Alina hadn't confronted her directly. She'd been gathering proof, quietly, patiently. Just like me now. I began making copies, not hurriedly, carefully. I scanned documents at the library, paid in cash, stored them on a flash drive hidden inside an old toolbox in the garage. I wrote notes of my own times, conversations, witnesses. I practiced remembering details the way Alina must have taught herself to do. At dinner one night, Claire sighed theatrically. "Dad, the lawyer thinks we should finalize the power of attorney soon, just to make things official." I chewed slowly, swallowed. "If you think that's best." Her smile was immediate and triumphant. "I do." That night I didn't sleep, not from fear, from clarity. The silence had sharpened my hearing. I could hear the house again, not mourning, waiting. Days passed, then weeks. People stopped checking on me. Claire had convinced them I was stable, as long as she was in charge. I became background furniture in my own life, and in that invisibility I moved freely. I visited the bank alone one morning, using a branch Claire never used. I didn't accuse, I asked questions, calm ones, hypothetical ones. The manager, a woman Alina used to chat with, frowned as numbers didn't add up. "I might need copies," I said softly, "for my records." She nodded, "Of course." At home, Claire announced she was planning a short trip. "Just a few days," she said. "You'll be fine." "I always am," I replied. While she was gone, I found the rest. Hidden behind a false panel in her old childhood room, Alina must have known Claire would never look there. I found an envelope. Inside was a letter addressed to me, sealed, dated 6 months before Alina's death. My hands shook as I opened it. "Richard, if you're reading this, then I was right to be afraid. Claire doesn't know I kept this last set of copies. She thinks she's smarter than silence. She is. Silence watches. Silence remembers. Do not confront her alone. Do not rush. Truth works best when it's allowed to walk into the room by itself." I sat on the bed and let the quiet settle around me. Not empty quiet, purposeful quiet. When Claire returned, she was radiant, relaxed. She kissed my cheek and said, "I've been thinking we should put the house in my name, less stress for you." I smiled back, small, harmless. "Whatever you think is right," I said. She didn't hear the other sentence I didn't say. "Not yet." Because silence isn't weakness. It's the pause before the balance shifts. The shift didn't announce itself. It never does. Power rarely storms in. It slides quietly into the hands of the person who prepared for it. Claire began pushing harder, and that was my first confirmation. When someone thinks time is on their side, they rush. When they rush, they make mistakes. She scheduled another meeting with the lawyer and spoke as if decisions were already made. "Dad understands," she kept saying, glancing at me only long enough to make sure I stayed silent. I did. I even signed a preliminary document, nothing binding, just enough to reassure her. On the drive home, she was cheerful, almost giddy. "I'm proud of you," she said. "This can't be easy." "It isn't," I replied honestly. She took my words as gratitude. She didn't hear the warning in them. That afternoon, I made a call of my own, then another, then a third. I didn't expose anything yet. I didn't accuse. I repositioned. The bank manager agreed to flag irregular activity without alerting Claire. The lawyer, my lawyer, not the one Claire preferred, reviewed Aliner's documents and raised his eyebrows slowly, carefully, the way professionals do when they see something serious but don't want to alarm the room. "This isn't confusion," he said. "This is pattern." I nodded. "I know." I also contacted an old family friend, Thomas, who worked in forensic accounting. He owed Aliner a favor from years ago. He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Send me everything." Claire noticed the change before she understood it. She started asking where I'd been, why I was suddenly busy, why the bank had called me instead of her. Her voice sharpened, impatience bleeding through the concern she'd perfected. "I thought we agreed I'd handle this," she said one evening too quickly. "We did," I replied calmly. "You handle most things." "Most, not all." Her eyes narrowed just for a second, then the smile returned. That night she locked her door. She hadn't done that since she was a teenager. The next week, I made one small move that tilted the ground beneath her feet. I revoked the temporary access she had to one of the accounts, quietly, legally, without confrontation. I didn't touch the others, just one, enough to be noticed. She confronted me in the kitchen, voice low and furious. "The bank says there's been a change." "Yes," I said, sipping my coffee. "I asked for it." "You can't just do that," she snapped. "You'll confuse them." "I wasn't confused," I replied. The word hung between us. She stared at me, really looked at me for the first time in weeks, as if recalibrating who she was dealing with. I could almost see the calculations restarting behind her eyes. She tried another angle. "Dad, are you angry with me?" "No," I said truthfully. "I'm observant." That unsettled her more than anger would have. From that moment on, she watched me, and that was the real shift. When the hunter realizes the prey is looking back, the game changes. I stopped pretending not to understand paperwork. I asked specific questions in front of people. I corrected her politely when she misstated facts. I didn't argue, I clarified. There's a difference, and she felt it. At a family dinner, my sister mentioned the house sale again. Before Claire could answer for me, I spoke. "I've decided to keep the house," I said evenly. "Aliner wanted that." Claire froze, just a fraction of a second too long. "But we talked about," she began. I listened, I interrupted gently, and I decided. Silence spread around the table, not awkward, respectful. My sister nodded slowly. "That makes sense." Claire smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, she knocked on my door. "You're changing," she said, not accusing, assessing. "So are you," I replied. She left without another word. By then, Thomas had finished his review. The numbers told a clean, brutal story, transfers disguised as loans, signatures traced back to copied forms, a timeline that aligned perfectly with Aliner's notes. Everything was ready. Claire still thought she was steering. She didn't realize the wheel had already been taken from her hands, quietly, patiently, by the man she had mistaken for broken. And power, once it shifts, doesn't shift back. It waits for the moment to be revealed. The moment arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, ordinary enough to disarm suspicion. Claire had invited the lawyer over her lawyer to finalize a few things. She didn't ask me if that was okay. She told me, the way you tell furniture you're moving it. I agreed. Shock works best when it walks into a room unannounced. We sat at the dining table where Alina once planned holidays and birthdays. Claire laid out folders, neat and confident, already halfway through her performance. She spoke quickly, efficiently, as if speed itself were authority. Dad understands the arrangement, she said, sliding a document toward me. This will just make everything smoother. The lawyer glanced at me, Mr. Harris. I didn't answer right away. I reached into the drawer beside me and placed a flash drive on the table instead. Claire frowned. What's that? Something your mother left behind, I said calmly. The room shifted, not visibly but emotionally, like pressure dropping before a storm. The lawyer hesitated. Should I? Yes, I said, you should look at it. Claire laughed, sharp and brittle. Dad, please, we don't have time for forgeries, I finished softly. Her smile collapsed. I opened my folder, not the one she'd prepared, but mine. Copies spread across the table like cards finally turned face up. Bank records, timelines, Alina's handwriting, Thomas's analysis, the bank's internal flags. Shock doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like stillness so intense it feels unnatural. What is this? Claire whispered. This, I said, is what you hoped I'd never understand. She stood abruptly. This is insane, you're confused. The lawyer cleared his throat, eyes scanning page after page. His expression tightened. Ms. Harris, these are serious allegations. They're not allegations, I said. They're records. Claire's voice rose. Mom was sick. She didn't know what she was writing. She knew, I replied. That's why she hid copies where only someone patient would find them. The lawyer leaned back, color draining from his face. I'm going to have to pause this meeting. Claire turned on him. You can't. I can, he said firmly, and I am. That was the first crack in her control. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. She looked at me then, really looked, as if seeing a stranger. Why are you doing this to me? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I let the truth speak at its own volume. You did this, I said. I just stopped being quiet. Her anger erupted, frantic now. You think this will fix anything? You think people will believe you over me? I slid one final document forward, a statement from the bank manager, signed, dated, verified. The fight drained out of her. Shock is realizing the ground you stood on was never solid. Within an hour, the lawyer had excused himself and advised Claire to seek independent counsel. By evening, my sister had called, confused, shaken, apologetic. By nightfall, Claire was locked in her room, phone buzzing endlessly with messages she couldn't answer fast enough. I didn't gloat. I didn't confront her again. Revenge doesn't need witnesses when truth is the one delivering the blow. The next morning, Claire didn't come downstairs. A note sat on the counter, not an apology, an explanation, long, defensive, empty. She left before noon. I sat alone at the table, sunlight cutting across Alina's old place setting. The shock had passed. What remained wasn't satisfaction. It was relief. Because the most devastating revenge isn't destruction. It's exposure. And once exposed, a lie has nowhere left to live. Weeks passed, and with them came the quiet settling of consequences. Not dramatic ones, not the kind people gossip about. The kind that rearrange lives permanently without noise. Claire didn't return to the house. Her lawyer contacted mine. Words like misunderstanding and family matter floated across emails, carefully chosen, legally empty. I declined every attempt at a private resolution, not out of anger, but because truth doesn't bargain. The investigation moved forward on its own momentum. Banks don't like patterns. Courts don't like forged signatures, and judges don't like children who mistake inheritance for entitlement. When the hearing came, I sat in the back of the room. I wasn't asked to perform grief or outrage. I just answered questions, clearly, slowly, honestly. Elinor's notes spoke when I didn't have to. Numbers have a voice that doesn't shake. Claire avoided my eyes the entire time. The ruling wasn't cruel, justice rarely is, it was precise. Funds were returned where possible, accounts were frozen, future access denied, conditions imposed, consequences defined. No one clapped, no one cried. That's moral justice. It doesn't celebrate, it restores balance. Afterward, my sister walked with me to the steps outside the courthouse. She didn't try to explain herself. She just said, "I should have listened sooner." "Yes," I replied. And then, because holding on to resentment would only prolong Claire's damage, I added, "But you're listening now." She nodded, relief in her eyes. The house felt different when I returned home. Not empty, open. I brought Elinor's armchair back from storage, placed her books where they'd always been. I didn't preserve the house like a shrine. I lived in it again. That was the promise I made at her grave, though she'd probably laugh at how long it took me to understand it. One afternoon, I opened the last envelope Elinor had left me, the one I hadn't needed until now. Inside was a single line, written in the same steady hand I'd trusted for 3 decades. "Truth doesn't need anger, it needs patience." I framed it. Months later, Claire sent a letter, not an apology, not a demand, just a statement of distance. She wrote that she was starting over somewhere else. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Some bridges aren't burned, they're simply left unbuilt. People ask me if it hurt to lose a daughter while grieving a wife. The answer is yes, but not in the way they imagine. Loss hurts most when it's mixed with illusion. Once illusion is gone, pain becomes manageable, honest, human. I learned something Elinor had known long before I did. Silence isn't surrender, it's restraint. And restraint, when guided by truth, becomes power. I wasn't restored by revenge. I was restored by dignity. By the end, no one was ruined. No lives were theatrically destroyed. What happened instead was simpler and far more lasting. A lie was stopped. A truth was honored. And a man who was once spoken over learned that quiet doesn't mean weak, it means waiting.